Welcome, guys, to our March meeting. Thank you all for joining us virtually. I know it's been a rough couple of weeks. I hope you guys are kind of staying safe, staying healthy. So for this month, we have a couple awesome guests planned. If you have any questions as these guests are presenting, please put them in the Q&A section of your panel here, the Zoom panel. If you have general comments, things like that, feel free to use the chat at that point, or if you want to send someone a message directly. So I am one half of the leadership team at the North Texas User Group. The other half, his name is Joey Ramos. Joey, are you on the call? Are you unmuted at all?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
All
great.
right.
I just wanted you to kind of introduce yourself. I'll introduce myself, and we'll get things kicked off. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's great. Hey, how's everyone doing today? Just to reiterate what, sort of echo what Tim said, thanks for joining us virtually. Can't meet in person this month, but I do appreciate you guys joining us via Zoom. We started this user group probably, I think it was January 2018. The last, 24 plus months has been a really nice journey. And myself, I've been using the tool for over 6+ years. I do not pretend to be an expert. I learn something new every day, even from brand new users. They'll show me a new technique here and there. But basically, yeah, I've just been using Tableau for the past 6 years, and I'm glad you guys could join us today.
Absolutely. So again, my name's Tim. I've been using the tool also for 4 or 5 years-ish. My background, I led a COE for a couple of years at an organization here in DFW. I've moved on now to contract and consulting with Tableau. I want to echo kind of what Joey said, in that while we've been using it for a long time, we learn new things constantly. So we always are looking out for suggestions, ideas. If you're watching this and you think there might be a better way for maybe something we're doing, feel free to raise your hand or shoot us a message in the chat. We know we're not experts, so we always defer to the community for new ideas and thoughts. With that, I want to kind of talk through our goals as a community. We started this group and we kind of wanted to establish some pillars of what we're about. The first being collaboration. I know that's kind of hard to do here virtually, but when we're in person, we like to kind of network, talk, have a beer with somebody, kind of get ideas on what they're doing, kind of how they're using the tool, how they're using data in general. And a lot of times we can go back to our work with fresh ideas. I just mentioned network. Again, a lot easier in person. But we have social networking, we have LinkedIn, we have a Slack channel. We don't really use a ton. We have Twitter, so feel free to connect with us on any of those platforms. Those are all great networking opportunities. Of course, spread the word. The more people familiar with this group, the more people that interact with this group, the better. It's not possible to have too much brain power in a room, so we always like to include new folks when we get the opportunity. And finally, have fun. We like to think we're a pretty relaxed environment. We're not here to be, super formal. We like to share ideas, share techniques, and keep it pretty relaxed. One thing I do want to emphasize is, especially for the folks in North Texas, this is your community. You determine the format, you determine the topics of things we're going to cover. We'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to see more best practices, more technical demos, that's things we want to know. That helps us kind of shape future meetings and determine what our agenda is going forward. So with that, let's talk a little bit about today's agenda. Let's see here, load this up. All right, so like I mentioned, we have 2 awesome guests with us today. Obviously, we can't grab a beverage and meet your local data fam because we're virtual, but we'll try to do that in April. So first, we're going to take a look at a presentation that I recently saw on Twitter. It kind of caught my eye because I come from a background where we leveraged design thinking and data viz. We really like to do user-centered reporting and feedback. So that report, what you're about to see here today, the methodology for creating Tableau reports in Tableau, really caught my eye for that reason. So Daria is going to present that for us, and we'll talk about more. Talk to her in a second. Our next guest is Steve Fenn. So he's been using Tableau for quite a while, and I'll let him give his introduction here in a moment. But he's going to talk to us about how much we can do in one line chart, or how much can it teach us, rather. So with that, I'm going to actually kick it over to them, Daria and Steve. Daria, I think, Steve, you guys are both muted, so go ahead and take yourself off mute if you want to introduce yourselves here.
Sure. So I'll go first. My name is Daria. So essentially, I've been working as a Tableau reporting developer for a couple of years. And so recently, I started my independent journey of learning and educating people on Tableau. So that is personally something that makes me feel absolutely inspired, because I know that Tableau is absolutely wonderful tool, first of all, when it comes down to organizing a self-service environment across any organization that kind of like that focuses on analyzing data. And if you just can think of data is everything, and it's like about anything that we deal with. So that is something that I think that is why Tableau really comes into play as really like incredible tool to reveal patterns, different trends, insights. So yeah, and so my experience as a consultant tells me that essentially one of the best things is just like to start when you, for example, collaborate with your stakeholder, is to start with the right questions. And beforehand to start working on your report, it's always great to gather all your requirements and have some sort of like vision on how your report is going to look like, because it's going to save you so much time and energy. And so this endless back and forth process is not going to happen. So that is something that I will try to share during this meeting.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. That's one thing I try to emphasize whenever I have the opportunity to. I see a lot of folks who are asked to do something in Tableau, and they'll just try to jump in and answer it without really trying to discover what the underlying question is. Not just, hey, I want this bar chart, go do it, but what is the problem you're trying to solve? There may be additional context there that we need. So yeah, your presentation caught my eye, and I'm excited for you to share it with our folks today. Also with us is Steve Fenn. So Steve, I know you're a big FC Dallas fan. You are originally from the DFW area, is that right?
Yeah, I grew up in Plano.
Awesome, excellent. And you are in Denver now, is that right?
I am in Denver. I'm in my unfinished basement because this is the reality we live in right now. So excuse the odd backdrop of plastic over insulation, but I've been living probably a plurality of my waking life in Tableau for nearly a decade at this point. I became a full-time Tableau consultant almost 5 years ago. And so I've been teaching a lot of Tableau classes, developing dashboards for clients. And throughout the decade, I've been doing a lot of sports data visualizations. And so today I want to share how my process of going through creating a line chart and iterating other features onto it, and also discussing the kinds of Tableau concepts that you can learn through that process, as well as some of the things you can learn about the topic. In this case, it's going to be about the acceleration of three-point attempts in NBA over the last couple decades.
Awesome. So I've linked, or I've put the link for both of your Tableau public profiles kind of at the bottom here. I really enjoy Daria's profile. It has a lot of real-world business techniques that you can take a look at, year-over-year calculations, these sort of things. Things you might use in your day-to-day life as an analyst leveraging Tableau. And I love Steve's profile. I really enjoy Steve's profile as well. His sports vizzes are right up my alley. So if that's something you're interested in, I would encourage you to check out their profiles. A ton of great work on both. So with that, I want to queue up Daria here for your presentation. Would you give us a little background into kind of how this came about? What made you decide to put this presentation together?
Definitely. So I think that the idea of like honestly putting the slides together and organizing it just like in a presentation came when I realized that first of all, I really want to start operating as an individual Tableau consultant and essentially as a Tableau coach. And so right now I'm in the process of doing some similar courses on design and applying, like making your dashboard interactive with actions and parameters. And so I think that the idea came when I realized that while I was working for such clients as McDonald's, Volkswagen, Kraft, Mercedes, so I've been always kind of like stumbling across the same issues. I never got a chance to ask enough questions, and I never asked the right questions to my client to understand what they really need and what they really want. And here's the thing. So one thing that I realized that usually our clients or stakeholders, they honestly really don't know what they want. And then you start this really interesting process of trying to guess what they want by each and every time creating a new dashboard, a new visualization, and like trying to guess that, okay, so like hearing their feedback. So this visualization I don't like because this and that, and this visualization I like because of that. And like you try to kind of like to pull the whole picture by like this kind of like a little bit like you just spend so much time on trying to guess what your client needs. And that is where I realized that, okay, so first of all, the first step I need is to know what are the right questions that will make my client think of the value of the information, of the content that they would like to see. The second step is knowing all these requirements. What are the types of reports that I'm trying to create, and knowing what is the right type of report. I have this vision. I have some sort of like template in my head that I will apply to that I will essentially recreate for my client based on gathered requirements. And so essentially I'm gonna start. So the methodology of creating reports in Tableau. So do you know, guys, how to read other people's thoughts? I don't know. Well then, start with the right questions. So first of all, we need to identify the audience. So the first question to start with is, who is the audience of the dashboard and what are their needs? The second question is, so what actions will they take in response to these answers? So essentially, we need to identify value. So once we identified value, the next question to ask is, what are the requirements? So what are the right questions to ask to them? So what questions need to be answered? What would you do with this information? What would you do if you knew this information? So once we identified what questions need to be answered, so then we ask what value this dashboard bring to an organization. So what is the scope? Are you guys trying to do something broad, so like displaying information about the entire organization, or are we looking about something specific, like focusing on specific function, process, or product? So what is the business role? Are we trying to create something more on strategic role? So, for example, some reports that provide a high level, broad, and long term vision, or we're trying to create something operational style. So, for example, any operational reports, they usually provide a very focused and near term tactical view of performance. The next question to ask essentially, what are the key metrics? So what are the KPIs that will focus users on actionable information? And the bottom line here is, how do we measure success? So every time I ask my client a question, how does success look like for you? So are we trying to, like, how do we understand if the numbers are good or bad? Do we have any targets, thresholds, year-over-year, month, week-over-week growth? So that is also something very useful that that helps to essentially to understand how do we measure success and how does success look like to our client. So now I will jump into dashboard requirements template. So here, that is kind of like an overall summary of all the slides that I presented. So essentially, dashboard requirements. So before creating a report, here are the questions that really help to ground, essentially help your client to think of the value and on like about the actionable information. So what questions need to be answered? What value will this dashboard bring to your organization? What is the scope? What is the business role? And what are the KPIs that will focus users on actionable information? So now we here are like I guess broad questions that we usually ask before we jump into more I guess detail oriented questions. So let's, for example, let's say that we need to build like a whole suite of reports for our stakeholder, right? So we need to understand what is the scope, what is the general idea, and what what is the general idea of the report that we are trying to create. Once we understood what is the main general idea, we can drill down to the further questions. So for example, what are the dimensions that you would like to see on your dashboard? What are the measures? What are the primary and secondary measures and dimensions, right? So now, what are the calculations that you need to bring to your dashboard, right? Do we need to see any change over time, like historical data, or do we need to look at like only a snapshot that is showing performance at a single point in time? So is it going to be like a real-time data or some sort of predictive analysis based on historical data? So once we asked about do we need change over time data, we can ask about filters, data granularity. Is there any logical grouping, comparison between categories and segments? What is the formatting, and what are the colors that they would like to use on their dashboard? So essentially, once we gathered all these requirements, then we sit down and we distill all this information. Essentially, I will probably suggest that you can test this requirement templates with your clients, with your stakeholders, and see whether this kind of like aggregated information is going to help you to understand what are the next steps and what are the most effective ways of visualizing the data based on requirements gathered. So once we gathered all requirements, we have all this information, The next step is essentially to identify what type of report am I trying to create for my client. So essentially, based on my experience, there are three main buckets of reports that we can create, and essentially based on user type, right? So whether we're trying to, based on our audience, whether it's like executive or the CEO or directors, or it's kind of like more analysts or let's say, for example, someone from operations department. And based on the level of report we're trying to create, we can bucket our report. Essentially, we can understand in which bucket our reports falls into. So essentially, as I mentioned, there are three main types. So the first type is executive level dashboard. So essentially, usually executive dashboards, they track key performance indicators and kind of like overall broad KPIs for just like the entire organization. So the second type is analytical dashboards. So they usually process data to identify trends. And the third type is, I guess, the most granular level reports. So operational reports that usually tell you what is happening now. And so now, I guess that I will talk a little bit more about each type of the reports. So start with,
Sorry,
yeah, sure.
sorry, real quick. There was a question in the chat, and I think you're about to answer it, but I just want to be safe.
Mhm.
The question was, can you specify what you mean by business roles? And I think that's what we're about to go into. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay,
So I think
perfect.
that I will cover this information just in a second. So executive type of reports. So essentially, the audience. Usually, we create these reports for other high-level management, so like either directors or, I guess, executive level. So usually, the level of granularity is high-level metrics. So the focus or the business role is essentially overseeing the overall state of the business. So essentially, these reports, they usually monitor progress to target year over year, quarter or over quarter, or month over month information. So, for example, it's always a good practice to, like to imagine yourself being, for example, executive. And for example, if you're the CEO of the company and you have like only 30 or 40 seconds to understand whether your organization, like what's going on in your organization, whether you're you're doing good or not. And so essentially, like think of, if you have only 30 seconds to answer this kind of like really important question, like how does your report is going to look like. And so essentially, just in a second, I will showcase some really good examples of executive dashboards. But essentially, executive dashboards, they're usually good for providing quick what, where, and when information that others will then go act on or investigate. But executive dashboard, they're usually not good for providing quick, more complex why and how questions. So they're usually not very good for exploratory analysis. So executive dashboards, they usually cover four major components. So they usually track current performance, target value, progress to target, historical trend like year over year, month over month change. And so usually when it comes down to typical visualization, I guess that here are some, most of the, like these are, I guess, really typical visuals that we usually use when we create executive dashboards. So usually, for example, we show we show bands. So essentially, bands are usually big numbers that ground your audience on kind of like really important information, and that's why usually it's always about best practice to show like big numbers. So usually when we have, for example, progress to target, it's always really good to show your current performance as a bar chart, and your target, I guess, just as a line. And here kind of like it's visually isn't easy to understand that we're progressing to target. So here, like for example, progress to target is 66%. And so yeah, and the rest is essentially other types of visuals that might be applicable when you create executive dashboard. And so let's jump right into templates. So essentially, that is the template that again show the actual performance, progress to target, and current performance, let's say previous period performance, and change over time. And it's always usually good to show some sort of like historical data, and for sure always put legends, so it's kind of like easy to understand which trends speak to which timeline. So that is one of the great examples of executive dashboards, and Andy Kripal has built this report, I guess a while ago. And so the reason why I really like this dashboard, because essentially each and every part of this dashboard is very concise, is very precise, and essentially it gives you like, I guess, sufficient information to answer the main question. What is the overall performance? Are we below or above the target? And so the best thing is that, for example, here there are just like really lots of information, but it's kind of like it has a very consistent format. And I guess the best practice in this dashboard is that like decrease is shown in this orange color, and in black color it's like always we're above the target. So the next question is analytical dashboards. So I guess that the same structure. So analytical dashboards, they usually focus on trends or deeper insights based on data collected over time. So analytical dashboards are usually great for exploratory analysis. They usually answer why and how this is happening, and they focus on a single topic and show high-level aggregate KPIs, as well as specific details that could provide insights. So usually they are not very good for presenting a comprehensive view of complex organizations. So it is not good for comprehensive view, and because essentially the dashboard can easily become overwhelming with information. So the audience, well, it's usually business or data analysts. So the level of granularity, it's usually top to bottom level metrics. So analytical dashboards usually are focused on specific segment of an organization. They usually monitor key metrics at a glance and allow you to drill down into why. And yeah, so essentially it answers why. While executive dashboards usually answer the question what is going on. Yeah, and so analytical dashboards usually show historical data and seasonality. So that is another template for analytical dashboards. So usually at the upper left corner we kind of like ground our audience on like the most important metrics. So usually we show what show KPIs for a specific segment. Are there any red flags in the business? So then we move into where and when. So we usually here show time and location, where and when this is happening. And here, this part also might allow you to drill down to and explore. So then left, like I guess that usually we put left down corner, not as important information as we usually put over here. So essentially, that is more kind of like why this is happening, where is the problem. And so essentially this part may also allow you to drill down to your exploratory dashboard. And so I guess that the final step, so your dashboard, your analytical dashboard has to provide call to action information. So knowing what is causing the problem, what is the next step to take, the bottom line. So here is the visual vocabulary for analytical dashboard. So again, so after presentation, you can just look at the vocabulary and dig into some visuals. So essentially, usually we use magnitude. So essentially that is essentially where is that is the information that usually shows year over year, month over month comparison, ranking, correlation, and power to whole. Here are some examples. So for example, analytical dashboards sometimes they're supposed to reveal some hidden information and patterns. So for example, for when it comes down for understanding what are the customers that generate, for example, your revenue. When we look at the sales performance, it doesn't quite necessarily shows you the full picture. So for example, here we're looking at Superstore's data set. And so we're looking at last 6 years performance. And essentially sales over time is growing. But my question is, who are those customers who generating the highest revenue? And so when we dig into understanding when these customers signed up, essentially when we start to analyze their cohorts, well, it doesn't look so promising, because essentially here we can see that each cohort that comes after 2017 generates only a fraction, for the previous year. So essentially customers acquired after 2018 generated 8% less than customers in 2017. And so essentially, the main takeaway is that despite the sales are growing over time, the company has a problem with acquiring and retaining new customers. So that is another example of analytical dashboard. So what, where, when, and which call to action template. So, and I guess the next part is operational dashboards. So essentially operational dashboards are usually applicable for middle management, operations, analysts. They usually present the most granular data, and they usually focus on catching red flags, and they monitor current activity. So it is usually good for identifying specific issues that require immediate action or fix, but they're not usually good for seeing a comprehensive view of their organizational KPIs. So the visual vocabulary, hourly trends, weekly trends, and I really usually use heat maps. And so examples, again, Andy created really amazing dashboard that kind of like at a glance shows you help desk performance. So these are weekly tickets volume. These are major and critical tickets. These are open tickets, tickets filed against against the target, I guess. So these are priority tickets and days to close. So that is kind of like very, I guess, good example of dashboard that tracks on an hourly basis their performance. And so essentially it shows you how many tickets, for example, with high priority and critical tickets and all this great information. And so I guess that another way to present kind of like a very granular data is to show in heat maps. So for example, on the X line, you can see the performance by hour. And so that is kind of like a heat map that covers weekly bicycles that are hired in London. And that is kind of like very good way to present granular level data that kind of like really easy to digest. And so that is another way to present kind of like very granular data. So that is I really like the type of visualization. So these are heat maps that essentially cover every weekday and hours. So essentially 24 hours each and every day. And here we can see easily understand that on Saturday during, for example, 10 a.m. up until 17 p.m. That is where Brooklyn pedestrians count the highest volume. And so essentially the summary is that asking the right questions is going to save time, energy, and resources on developing dashboards. And the game, guess what I would like to see on my dashboard, is not going to happen. So these are all the credits for really amazing guys. And so thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daria. Do you want to keep that, the credits up just for a second so people can take a look at those? Those are some really great Tableau public profiles. If you're not familiar with them, those are some pretty big names, some Zen masters there that are definitely worth a follow. So honestly, I love this presentation, Daria. It's one of the most complete presentations, especially specific to Tableau, that I've seen about user-centered design. So really awesome job. Does anyone have any questions for Daria? If you do, go ahead and put them in the chat or specifically the Q&A section, and we'll get them answered. I'll give it just a second here.
Okay, great. Okay, team. So would you like me to answer the questions right now, or?
Yeah, if you have some coming in, I don't see any yet. At least not on my side. Tell you what, we'll wait for questions to come in, and if we need to revisit at the end of the session, we'll do that. Is that okay?
Okay.
Awesome. So again, thanks for this presentation. We'll make this available after the meeting. And if someone wants to go get this right now, where can they find it? Where is this presentation available?
So I guess that if there are any ways how if like, for example, I can upload this presentation into the meeting, or I can definitely share my Tableau public profile, and as well I can share it with anyone who just like can like send me their email or anything. I can just like forward it as, for example, as a presentation, PDF presentation.
Yeah, so your public profile will probably be an easy place to go get it. It's on your Tableau public?
Yeah.
Awesome. So for those of you that are interested
to Daria's Tableau public, as well as my own in the chat a little bit earlier.
Awesome. Yeah. Steve shared those links in the chat. So go to that chat if you're looking for the public profiles, and you'll be able to download that presentation.
Awesome.
One of the questions was, do we need permission every time? And I'm assuming that's to access Tableau public. Is that right?
Permission.
I don't know what that's in reference to.
The slides.
Oh
So,
yeah, as long as you have, I think you're able to download public Tableau public workbooks. No,
um,
no
yeah,
file.
I think that you guys can upload this presentation as, I guess, PowerPoint or PDF file. So yeah, I think this option is
Yeah, I don't
available.
think you'll need those permissions. Yeah. All right. So if there are no more questions, we're going to pass it over to Steve now. If anyone thinks of anything in the meantime, we'll address questions again at the end. So Steve, if you want to go ahead and get us kicked off here.
Thank you very much. And Daria, thank you very much for your presentation. Also, I want to affirm all of those links you put on the screen at the end. All of them are great Tableau authors and very generous with their knowledge with the community, and really nice people in person. I've been fortunate to be able to meet all of them at multiple Tableau conferences. My name's Steve Fenn. I, as I mentioned earlier, basically been living in Tableau a large portion of my life for nearly a decade now. It's my vocation and my hobby. I predominantly teach Tableau professionally and also develop dashboards. And I've been, as a hobby ever since I started using it, analyzing sports data just for fun. And I found that it's a great way to expand knowledge of the tool and kind of test your abilities. Um, and if you're not a sports fan, go find some data around another interest of yours, politics, weather, whatever, and play in Tableau. A lot of the people that are best in this tool tend to be those that find a reason to have a little bit of fun with it, as well as just making the business dashboards. So you can reach me most easily on Twitter. That website and app has its problems, but I do find it's a fantastic way to share ideas with people, particularly around an expertise like Tableau. And so my Twitter handle is @stathunting. And then hold on, the Zoom meeting thing is getting in my way. I have an upcoming class I'm teaching online for learning Tableau through sports data. And so that is on Eventbrite. I'll put that link into the chat window in just a moment. And then I've also got a blog post about that class on my LinkedIn. My pinned tweet at the top of my Twitter account is also about that class. And that class starts a week from Saturday. Here's my Tableau profile. You'll see I've got 228 visits in there. I'm pretty active in it. And I have a lot of fun. This one was displayed in the Viz Gallery at Tableau Conference last year. Had a lot of interesting conversations with folks about that. And you'll see a whole lot of soccer and basketball and other sports things in there too. But today we're going to talk about what can you learn from one line chart, or what could you teach others from a single line chart. I'm going to walk you through a progression of the steps that I went into and kind of why I took those steps in order to reach this dashboard where I've got IQRs, which are the range between 25th and 75th percentiles of all players or a chosen position within the NBA, and how often they took three-pointers relative to all of their shots. Those of you unfamiliar with basketball, just basically there's been kind of a revolution in how the game is played and how often they're shooting from distance, because analysts actually started getting listened to and teams won when they were playing smarter. And so here's the final dashboard, and you can see where we have some pretty different approaches taken by different positions across these last 2 decades. What I'm going to do now is go step by step in the building of it and talk about why I'm taking certain approaches. I'm going to get my video out of the way. If my video is in the way of the screen share of Tableau, you can click and drag it within your Zoom to make sure you can actually see all my notes up here as we go. So some of this is going to start out very, very basic, but there are going to be many, many concepts within Tableau that are kind of touched upon. And I'm going to go kind of fast, but once we get to the end, I'll ask you in the Q&A to tell me which concepts you'd like me to talk in more detail about. Which is in building a basic line chart, Generally, you want your dates on the columns because it's more intuitive for people to look at dates left to right than up to down. Up to down, they don't know if most recent year should be at the top or the bottom, but everybody kind of knows past is on the left, futures on the right. You're going to drag your measure to rows, so you're defining the height of the line by that. In this case, so the default aggregation of sum actually doesn't work. 3-point attempt rate is essentially the percentage of shots any player takes that are behind the 3-point line. And so trying to add up all those percentages just kind of gives you a nonsense number. Okay, in 1997, adding those percentages led to 111.7. That actually doesn't mean anything. And so we have to change the aggregation. And so median makes a whole lot of sense in this case, given the data structure we're given and the way we might want to explore it. I'm looking at the kind of the middle player whenever we're looking at, in this case, all players or a collection of a certain position. How often are their shots behind the 3-point line? Another step I usually take when I am going through my analysis is formatting my numbers correctly. 3-point attempt rate should be a percentage, and so we say it up as a percent. And then also rewording the axis, because the default name of median 3PAR is going to be much less intuitive than median 3-point attempt rate. Also, we really don't have to use the word year or date down here. It's pretty intuitive to folks that are looking at years when they see numbers at this scale. Often it's good when you see an outlier in your charts to go research it and see if there's a particular reason that you want to annotate for your audience. In this case, this little jump up for 3 years is because the NBA shortened the 3-point line during that time, and teams changed their tactics. But then that rule went away. It went kind of back down to the general trend we saw before the 3-point line was shortened. But another option would be to filter out your outliers if the time frame you're really concerned with doesn't include the outliers anyway, because I'd get kind of distracted by this outlier and think it's a major point because it is so different from everything else we're seeing. And just these last 2 decades is actually a pretty interesting trend. But what if the median isn't telling enough of the story? What if it's not impactful enough? You don't think it's really grabbing the audience's attention? In a case like that, and we're looking at distribution, I like to look at the IQR, which is the range between the 25th and 75th percentiles, and drive those from a second axis. And I'm doing all of this without any calculated fields. I got these simply by hovering over measure when right-clicking on a pill for 3-point attempt rate and hovering over percentile and choosing the standard percentile I want, in this case 25, and then down here, percentage of 75. I'm dragging one of those over to the right-hand side where the second axis should be. And we have that range. The graph is wrong though. You look at your axes, you see very different scales. You need to synchronize your axis almost every time you're using dual axes in Tableau. Most of the time I see non-synchronized dual axes, I get really nervous about someone misleading their audience. And then once you synchronize, you don't need that second axis to actually show over here. And so we just hide that second axis. So that's a little bit more striking. The colors are kind of random. Tableau just throwing measure names on the color shelf. And so let's look at a different way to approach it. What if instead of these 2 lines above and below, and the audience wouldn't necessarily know which of the lines to pay the most attention to, what if we had verticals for every individual year running between our 75th and 25th percentile? It's not as hard as you think. I removed measure names from the color shelf, and then it takes on this funky look. But if I then put discrete year onto the detail shelf, right now it's just continuous year, but if I make that discrete, which you can do simply by right-clicking on and choosing discrete right here, then you've got those vertical lines. And because we've got these two different versions of the lines coming from two axes, we've got different marks cards for them. Got a marks card for the median line and a marks card for the measure values line, which is those ranges from 25th to 75th percentile. And so we've got separate color shelves and size shelves for all of these. So I make my IQRs gray. I make my median line orange. I make it a little bit wider. And then you want to move the marks to the front, often with a dual axis. I don't want these gray lines in front of the line that I'm actually caring about the most. And so I go to the axis of the one that I want to see in front and choose move marks to front. So that brought that one to the fore. And we can move on beyond that and label the ends of our lines to reinforce the primacy of our median as the primary thing I want the audience to look at. It's also part of the reason for the color choice. Gray is a little more naturally secondary, but the orange here is going to pop. And I got those line in labels simply by showing mark labels, marks to label as line ends, and under the font menu, choosing match mark color, so it'll be the exact same orange on those labels. And I set the size of it and made it Tableau medium, so it's a little bit bolder. Tick mark spacing can be a nice way to go about reinforcing which years are most important to our analysis here. And the approach I took was to label every 19th year starting in 2001, which led to only labels on the first and the last year. The way you get there is you edit your axis, click on tick marks, choose fixed, tick origin of 2001, tick interval of 19 in this case. My biggest recommendation for formatting is to make it simpler. Get rid of any line that isn't actually adding value to your presentation. In this case, the borders around it, the grid lines, zero lines that'll come in, all should go. And so I get rid of all of those. And by the way, you can do all of that simply by going to the Format menu, choosing Borders. Originally, these had a color associated. You just open up that menu and click None, both on row divider and column divider, and then go over to Lines, and you see None for both zero lines and grid lines. If axis rulers had been on, I probably would have set that to None as well. But always ask, what can I take away that would actually improve things? I'm also increasing the font sizes for my axes. Always assume that your audience has got worse eyesight than you. So up until this moment, I haven't used any calculated fields, groups, or parameters whatsoever. I've just taken what the data has given me, used some different aggregations in Tableau, and that is it. There was some filtering on years. I was using somewhat non-standard aggregations to get those 25th and 75th percentiles, but there were no calculated fields whatsoever. We do need to do that now, though. So there is a data pitfall in this data, and that is that in basketball reference, which I mined all this data from, there are some oddities when a player gets traded or otherwise changes team in the middle of the season. So in one season, this player, Ryan Anderson, played for both Phoenix and Miami. And the basic data source gives us 3 records for that. One for Miami, one for Phoenix, and one for his total for the season across both teams. And the best way I've found to tackle that is to create a calculated field like this one, where I'm going to leverage, I'll make that really large and easy to read. So I can use a level of detail function to quickly find out how many rows, or number of records, we have for every player and year, and give it a logic test of whether those are greater than 1. So if we only had one record, that would naturally mean by the logic of the data that player only played for one team. We'd want to keep that record anyway. And so if we've got more than one record, then I want to get a true response only if the team field equals TOT for total. Otherwise, it means I've only got the single record and I want a true to come back. And then I'm filtering this whole thing to only keep true responses from this calculated field. And when I do that, we see a bit of a shift in the graph. We've gotten rid of all those essentially duplicate, non-additive records for something like 3-point attempt rate. And so we've got a truer representation of what's going on in our data. Again, I just put that calculated field I showed you onto the filter shelf, and I chose true. Now, another aspect that I would expect an audience to want is to be able to look at the different shooting patterns for different positions of basketball players. If you're not familiar with the sport, generally the shorter guys are called guards. They're going to hold the ball more often. Historically, they're going to shoot from distance a lot more often than the bigger guys. And I need a way to look at that. So there are essentially 5 positions in basketball: point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, and center. The problem with our standard position field in this data, though, is we've got a lot of kind of in-between values. We've got these hyphens to say, well, this guy kind of played both positions that year. We can clean that up pretty easily with some groups, parameters, and a contains function. The group is my first step here. I'm going to expand these to show you how it works. So all of these, I'm simply looking at the values, figuring out which ones they actually represent, grouping them together, and then renaming them in a consistent order of the 2-letter abbreviations for each of those positions. Then I create a parameter that is listing off all of those 2-letter abbreviations, or single letter for centers, and then the word all. And then I create my position parafilter, I call it, in which I ask, does the positions group contain the value that the audience has selected for the choose a position parameter? And because I've aligned my abbreviations in the parameter and the group, I can consistently say that if point guard was listed as one of their positions in the original data, then this will come back as true if the audience chooses point guard. Then I also put in an or clause to say if the choose a position parameter equals all, then give me true. So essentially, if they choose all, I'm going to see everything. If they choose one specific position, I'm going to see every player that was listed as playing that position, at least to some extent in that season. I will take questions from the chat window and especially the Q&A, and we'll get to that at the end here, which is coming up pretty soon. So now I put all of that in place. I've got my position parafilter on my filter shelf. Similar to the others, simply choosing true as my function. And I'm cycling through the different positions here and seeing the different ways in which those positions have kind of evolved over time relative to 3-pointers. But looking at all 5, you'll see that in all 5 positions and in players overall, we've seen a big uptick over the last couple decades. You also want to organize all the pertinent info into a straightforward tooltip. Right now, the standard tooltips, analysts will be all right with it. We're listing what the value is, what the field is on the left, what the value is on the right. Okay, we're conversant in data. We can kind of figure that out. But don't assume that your audience is as friendly with data as you are. Put it in plain English as much as you can. You get to here. Now we put it out in a nice, clean way where the audience can just read it. All players in 2013. Median took 23% of his shots from 3. The middle 50% of all players had rates between 1% and 40%. And whatever year they're hovering over, you get that information organized the same way. Quick note on how I did that. I wanted to make sure that median 3-point attempt rate, percentage, and the percentiles from 25 and 75 were available in all. And so I went to the all marks card and made sure all 3 of those were on the tooltip. So regardless of which line I'm hovering over, I've got the information for all 3 of those aggregations. Now let's talk about an alternate way to organize the IQRs. If I tried to make them fatter and increase the size of them as lines right now, it would get a little awkward. You'd have rounded edges. It wouldn't look as precise. So instead, I switched my measure values marks card to Gantt bar. See, it was on automatic. Now it's on Gantt bar. And we've got lines above and below. That might be what you want. But I'd also kind of like to fill in those areas. And to do that, I have to, again, create a calculation. This time, IQR range. I'll edit that and show you. These are essentially the calculated fields that are automatically created when I went through this menu and chose measure percentile 25 and measure percentile 75. So I just dragged those pills onto a new calculated field, put a minus in between them, and that was it. And then I put IQR range onto the size shelf. Like that. Same information, but just organized a little bit differently as Gantt bars instead of as their own lines. Decided to make the line itself a little bit wider. Plus another little formatting tweak that's subtle, but from the median marks card, I can go to color, choose markers with these dots, which is why you've got little circles on each one of those. And now I create a legend via an annotation in the unoccupied corner of the graph. I did this by right-clicking, choosing Annotate Area. And I got some Unicode characters that did a good enough approximation of what's seen on screen. So I had a vertical rectangle for the IQRs. I had a little upwards line for the median player. And then there's one other data pitfall you want to be aware of. Minutes played. Always think about sample size. In the case of this NBA data, there are often players that just don't get off the bench very often. They're young, they're learning, the coach doesn't trust them, whatever. But they've got stats. Should they really be contributing to these percentiles and medians? Probably not. So I take MP, which is my minutes played field, dragged it onto filters. And I chose to filter at a row level to only include players who had played at least 500 minutes. Yeah, well, I'm seeing some questions in the Q&A. If there are some in the chat as well, you might want to put them in the Q&A as well, because that is what I'm going to go from once we finish up. And the finishing touches are to enact animations, new feature if you haven't played with it, it's fun. Name the tabs, add to a dashboard, title it, some formatting tweaks. And so here's our dashboard. Oh, by the way, I didn't note it, but I definitely went to the phone layout and deleted layout. I hate Tableau's automatic phone layouts. They usually screw up my dashboards. And so I leave this as default and maybe build one of those from scratch later on. And so I drag in the chart, get rid of its title, where I had all the notes on what I was doing, show dashboard title, type in what I want it to be, part of it driven by the parameter itself. I got that choose a position parameter value to be dynamic, coming from the insert menu and choosing this. I hovered my choose a position parameter over here underneath my legend. And from here, with the animations on, we can see this evolution of the game and how it takes on different dynamics with different positions. And that is the building of a dashboard. And the Tableau concepts you can learn from the process or teach others through that process.
Hey, Steve, this is Joey. Hey, great presentation. Real quick, can you show the audience how you turn those animations on?
Yes, turning on the animations. You go to Format, choose Animations. Click on. That's kind of it. There are other options within here that you can play with yourself. The default is 0.3 seconds. I thought that was a little too fast, so I moved it to 0.5. There are different options for sequential or simultaneous. I actually haven't looked at those two options in this graph. If I go to power forwards and then change it to sequential and then go to centers. Yeah, sequential and simultaneous actually don't matter in this case. Some graph types, they make a very big difference in how it's going to look. Sometimes cool, sometimes really crazy. But that is how to turn on the animations.
And let me ask you a question. We had a question, I believe it might have been last user group, Tim. Do you think the animations have any effect on the performance of the Tableau server?
I do think they probably will have some. It depends. If you are doing a lot of data shaping work before you give the data to Tableau, it's relatively small. You're doing pretty straightforward preparation of your charts. It's probably not going to be noticeable. I have had projects already in the last couple months where I had to do a whole lot of work and we were dealing with a lot of data sets. I tried to use animations and it was just a non-starter. They were not nearly as responsive as I would want them to be. So,
Gotcha.
yeah, I wouldn't say they don't seem to be a big drag on queries, but there are certainly situations they're not going to be as effective as you.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we ever really came to a good answer last month. Some people thought that it wouldn't affect performance of the server, and some people said it would. I think it probably does, but some individuals in the audience said it wouldn't have any impact. Let me ask you a question. You obviously have a lot of experience, and you've taught probably hundreds, maybe even thousands of individuals how to use the tool. What are your recommendations on dashboard sizing? I think that's a question that Tim and I get a lot,
yeah.
Is how do you recommend the sizing of a dashboard?
Yeah, I've got a couple of standards for myself. And so in Tableau Public, I'm usually going to go one of two directions. I'm going to organize it around 1,000 by 600 or maybe scale it up slightly proportionally from there. But I've found that 1,000 by 600 is a proportion that's going to be pretty visible on most laptops. The folks in 4K might end up zooming in on the dashboard a little bit. But if somebody's got an older laptop, it'll still work without scrolling. I try to avoid scrolling, particularly when I'm designing for a use on a computer. If I am designing for Tableau Public, though, sometimes I'm going to assume that people are going to look at it from my Twitter account or LinkedIn account on a phone, and so I'd be more likely in that case to to organize it with a width of around 400, 450, maybe 500 at most, and make it taller so that they would scroll vertically. It all has to do with what I expect the audience, how I expect the audience to consume it, but also sometimes the nature of the visualizations that I'm including in here. This one, it is kind of naturally very horizontal and probably wouldn't work if I tried to narrow this thing to 400 pixels. I'd have to do a lot of reformatting before that's going to be effective at all. But that's my general rule of thumb, is 1000 by 600 as kind of my standard. That'll probably go up in proportion over time as higher resolution monitors become more and more common. And then if I'm anticipating that that cell phone consumption is going to be a major part of it, then I'd go with maybe a width of somewhere between 400 and 500 pixels and make it very tall. Does that answer the question?
Okay. Yes, that's a very good answer. I appreciate it. Tim,
Also,
it looks like there are
some. It's within Tableau Public in particular. If you think that if you're designing it for a laptop, but you think some people will look at it on a phone, you can put a suffix on your URL of show is home equals no, which will take away Tableau's automatic wrapping of the visualization. Let me show this real quick because it's one of my favorite little hacks. So here's my NBA player profiles. You could choose a player and look at similar players of the same position, teammates, etc., and see how he compares along a lot of different stats. And we get all this extra wrapping of Tableau Public automatically. But if I choose show viz home no, already got it queued up here. This is that same view, and the only difference of the URL is that I tacked on this little section on the end. And I will put that in the comments section right now. Put this into your, save this somewhere if you're going to be publishing things on Tableau Public. And remember, just add that suffix onto the URL of your viz. Test it before you share it. But in most cases, that's going to take away all the extra wrapping. And if somebody uses this URL from a mobile browser, it's automatically going to conform to the width of the screen, either in portrait or landscape mode.
Oh, nice little tip there. Appreciate it.
Sure.
So Tim, did you want to start looking at some of the questions in the question and answer section?
Yeah, so I'll queue these questions up for you, Steve. We got a handful of them here. So the first one's about your Eventbrite class.
Yep.
Is that a one-time event or an ongoing event?
That is an ongoing event. My first
Okay.
iteration of the class, and I'm putting the link into the chat right now. First iteration of the class is going to run Saturdays and Sunday afternoons, depending on your time zone. And I actually do have some people signing up from Europe that are going to join in the evenings for them. But that's going to run Saturday and Sunday afternoons, starting next Saturday, running for 6 weeks with the exception of Easter Sunday. So it'll be 11 sessions overall, and it is designed for folks who are self-taught in Tableau but don't feel very comfortable with some of the foundational concepts yet, don't feel fully confident in the tool, or flat out beginners. If you know somebody that's curious about Tableau and is a basketball or soccer fan in particular, please let them know about this. And I'd love to have more people join.
Awesome, excellent. So Michael asks about the multi-team filter. So he's asking, did you filter out players from multiple teams during a season?
Yeah, so a reminder of of the reason for the need for this. It's all about the data structure, in that most players in this data, for any individual season, you're only going to have one record. We see all these here: Jalen Adams, Steven Adams, Bam Adebayo. They all played for one team. They've only got one record. Well, we see an example right down here of Ryan Anderson, who in 2019 played for Miami, Phoenix, and then we've got one that says TOT. There is no team that would be abbreviated TOT. What this means in the website Basketball Reference, excuse me, excuse me. What this means is that this total line is his total values and rates, and you can see these in the additive areas, especially. If you were to add up the two records below, it adds up to that total line. And so if I'm looking at something like three-point attempt rate and the median across the group, I don't want to count all three of these records. And so in order to make that happen, I created this calculated field, which I will zoom in on again. And the intention here is to say, we've got an if and only if function. So if and only if, when we're fixed on player and year, we see more than one record, more than one row in the data source, then we're going to give it the logic test of team equals TOT, or total. If we do not see more than one record, then there's only going to be a single record for that player in that season. And so we just want the outcome of true. And so we should have one record for every player in every season, based on this going on the filter shelf and being filtered down to true as the value.
All right, excellent.
There could be situations where I was more concerned with what was actually going on while someone was on the roster of a certain team. If the analysis was going in another direction, in which case I'd probably use the same calculated field and just actually I'd probably change it a little bit, and I would probably put a not in front of this area. If I was in a situation where I still wanted to keep all of the trues, all the records with only one row for that player and year, I might put a not clause in front of the team equals total.
All right, so our next question in here is maybe a little bit about your background. The question is in regards to kind of how you got into sports analytics. Are there any recommendations you would make for someone to do kind of the same thing?
So I'm in my class, I'm going to walk people through how to do some data mining and gather those things. But in general, I just recommend going to the reference sites: basketball reference, football reference, hockey reference, baseball reference. FBref.com is a football reference in terms of soccer, as we would call it. They've all got lots of interesting data there. Many of them can be easily mined through Google Sheets. Basketball reference is where I got this from. Also, the league websites generally have a stats page. Some are friendlier than others, but it's a great way to go get some useful information for some analysis. My big warning to people who start doing sports analysis is try not to just answer trivia questions. Try to center your dashboards on a single question, but a kind of interesting one that allows you to explore it with some nuance.
Absolutely. So I use, personally, I use Pro Football Reference a lot.
Right.
Just to do some of my own geeky homework for NFL stuff. But yeah, those are all excellent sources. Yeah. Let's see. Will Perkins is in here. He says, "Hi, Steve."
I will.
All right, let's see. So the next question I see here is about football or soccer data. I know you mentioned kind of a data source on where to get that information. Is there a specific tool that you might recommend to keep that data fresh or live?
So I've been using, predominantly I use Google Sheets to do my mining. And so on my, unfortunately I can't really show off how live it is and how it updates daily because there's nothing to update right now. But for example, let me go to my profile page again. And so this one right here is coming from, telling my internet connection is unstable. Am I still coming through well? We good?
Yep, you're good. Yeah.
Okay. So this one's coming from the Major League Soccer website, and it is one that would be better in full screen. And it's looking at soccer players in front of goal and how efficient they are and how often they shoot versus how often they score. These background colors are kind of aligned with the percentage of their shots that go in the goal. And so right now I don't have a 2020 value because there's not large enough sample sizes to make that useful. But if we had games going on the day after every game, the data on the MLS website would update and my, oh, whoa, hold on. Just a moment here. Am I coming through a little clearer again?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, good. So the so if games were coming in, the mining of the Google Sheet would automatically refresh every day, and Tableau Public would automatically refresh from the would automatically refresh based on the new information coming in. And I could pull up a sheet, though that would take me a minute. I don't have it primed right now to show you how that works. While you're looking at another question, I'll start to do that real fast.
Actually, yeah, so I want to bring Daria back in for this one as well.
Great.
I know you have some of your Tableau Public profile has marketing dashboards on it.
Yep.
Daria, you still here with us?
Yep, I am.
Awesome. So the next question we have is about building a marketing technology stack with Tableau. I guess the question is it possible? The short answer is yes, but I would imagine there's going to be multiple facets to that answer. Could you tell us a little bit about the dashboards, Daria, that you have out there?
Absolutely. So would you mind if I probably share some of the reports that I have on Tableau Public?
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, would you mind?
I'll stop sharing right now. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Just 1 second. Okay, so that is the report I built for one of the clients that I got a chance to work for. And essentially, again, so when we're talking about marketing reports, right? So we need to start with asking the question, so what is the type of data that we're dealing with? So either it's, let's say, for example, digital data, right? Or, for example, let's say we're trying to analyze performance for like a specific email campaign. And so my understanding, like my experience is that when we're talking about, let's say, email marketing campaigns, so there are usually several KPIs that essentially allow us to understand whether like the targeted audience engaged with email that we send them to. So, and to that we have like specific I guess KPIs. So it's usually we track click-through rate, click-through open rate, unsubscribe rate, so on and so forth. So that is what we can usually try to track. And the second, I guess the bottom line is always to do like some sort of, I guess, sales matchback, because essentially the bottom line is not just to understand whether users actively engaged with this specific email, but what is the like return on investment, right? So what is the business value of this particular email campaign? And so, for example, for this dashboard, we were looking at total sales, the number of people we reached, how many people redeemed like a specific coupon, how many people unsubscribed. And so that is essentially all email engagement metrics. Let's say, for example, open rate, click-through open rate, unsubscribe rate, and And again, the next section covers sales matchback. So that is just like a simple example of what you can do for example, for marketing, when it comes down to work with marketing, marketing departments. And again, so for example, I got another example of working with digital data, right? So usually when we work with digital data, so for example, we can plug in data that comes from Google Analytics, and there we can directly analyze some KPIs, like for example, where do people click most, and essentially, again, the bottom line is to drive those people who, let's say, click on one product. What is the user engagement flow, and how we can make them, let's say, purchase more or buy more. And essentially Tableau helps to analyze first of all their engagement metrics, right? To analyze where do they click more, and so what is the part of content with which they engage more, and essentially the bottom line, how we can make them buy more.
Excellent. I think there's a follow-up to that question as well. Are there any tutorials you recommend for this marketing stack?
That's a great question, and well, I think that I don't have any specific sources that just come to my mind immediately, but I will definitely I can sorry, Tim, what are the places where I can share, like for example, some follow-up links? Do you guys?
So we have a LinkedIn group that's pretty active, so I can add you to that group, and you'll be able to share them there.
Yeah, definitely. I'll definitely think of some resources, and I will share them.
Okay, excellent. All right, it looks like we have a couple more questions here. There's another one about dashboard size, so I'm going to open this up to both of you, Steve and Daria. Joey mentioned earlier this kind of same question. I think what him and I tend to do is we start something like what is it, A10 landscape, I believe. We'll start there and scale up. But what I would say as a general rule of thumb is it's important to understand how that dashboard is going to be used and how it's going to be viewed. You really want to ultimately design for the device, whatever device your user has. So it's tough to say there's a one size fits all. It's really case by case basis for me. But Steve, Daria, what do you guys think?
I would say, well, and I think one of the Q&As is also talking about downloading to PowerPoint format. So I would, I feel fortunate that I haven't actually gotten into that situation professionally very often. I'm not a fan of Microsoft, and so I kind of get the heebie-jeebies at PowerPoint and just about everything else that company puts out there. I would recommend Google is your best friend. There are probably some standards on the particular aspect ratio that would be friendliest to PowerPoint, or it might be that you look at what aspect ratio you're expecting that PowerPoint to be displayed in, and size your dashboard around that. I think that would probably be the best bet for it to not start to look blurry, because usually the problem with blurriness is that you're zooming in, either in browser in Tableau Public or Tableau Server, or when downloading a PDF or a screenshot or a PowerPoint deck directly from Tableau, and then resizing.
Well, I guess that my answer, sometimes I create the same report just specifically for mobile use, and so sometimes I just recommend users to open like a specific version from their mobile device. And also wanted to add that I'm not sure whether it's kind of like relevant or not, but like my practice is that it's always great to subscribe some users for receiving their reports. Let's say, for example, for the executive team, it's always really great to subscribe them for some kind of like important reports, and that's where you don't get usually asked to, like to send them a report, or just, like as an image or a PowerPoint presentation. So just subscribe them for any views that they need to look at, and yeah, and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and chime in too. So where we consult, they want the subscription and the PDF because they do like to print it out. I guess they're a little old school. They like to print it out and take it with them to a meeting. So what works for me and what I instruct the people where I'm at to do is start with A4 landscape. Those dimensions, I believe it's 1169 by 829 or something like that. When you build a dashboard A4 landscape, it fits pretty well when you download it to PDF. So if you are going to do PDF or PowerPoint, I would recommend A4 landscape.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, try to avoid automatic dashboard sizing whenever possible.
Absolutely, yeah. So automatic gets folks in trouble, right? Things tend to scale and move around unexpectedly, depending on the device that's being used.
By the way, this would be the point
and
of
that is,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Steve, real quick, it's funny you said that because that is like the number one thing I tell everybody any chance I get. One tip I can give you, don't ever use automatic.
Yeah, I've seen some cases where an organization wants to use range, but defining it kind of narrowly. But even that, I'd recommend people be very careful with. You pick a specific aspect ratio and stick with it in most cases for me. Also, I want to note, this would be the point of the user group, I believe, where we'd be having drinks and just talking. So I poured myself some whiskey. We're isolated, but we're together. So cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers to you.
We get a couple more questions here before we wrap up. The next one is, what kind of dashboard is best for animations?
I've got one of those queued up, if you don't mind.
Awesome, yeah.
So I recommend animation, particularly when you've got a filter or parameter change on screen, and a big point is the progression from one state to the other when you're making those choices. So I created this a long time ago for Makeover Monday. It's trying to compare the predictions for where the English Premier League soccer league ended up that year and where they actually finished. So I've got dots for the predictions only, and I switched to actual finish, and Tableau public crash remote. We'll redo that now. But you can see it redraw itself to kind of reinforce the reality of what we're moving between when people make these different selections. And so that would be a case where I think animation makes a lot of sense. There are others. I do think it's a feature that's going to get overused in a lot of cases, but if you're filtering and bar charts are going to resort themselves, I like a sequential animation there where the bars are going to get longer or shorter and then reorder themselves. I found that to be a nice kind of flashy way to do it. There's a few that I thought would be good in animation, but they just get way too busy and don't really work, in my opinion. You just have to be very critical of your own approach and just not force animations into it.
Yeah, understand what value it does or doesn't add. Absolutely.
Right.
I've seen a lot of running bar charts. That was the popular thing for a while.
Yeah.
Right. With some of the ones I've seen were I think it was NFL stats. They were doing sack leaders throughout the history of the league. And there's a bunch of those out there.
And I'll teach the animated bar charts in my class. It's something that I think it is valuable to grab people's attention in the right situation. But there are also charts that of mine that I love that I never try to animate because it just doesn't make much sense. Oh, another one that that I think works pretty well with the animation is that scatter plot I showed earlier, which, if I share my screen one more time, I've got navigations in there from one season to the other. And as long as Tableau Public does it smoothly, we should see the players' data points move around as we go from season to season. So it's a little bit easier to track just how consistent or inconsistent their production is.
Yeah, when animations were first released, I had a kind of conversation with Andy Kriebel on Twitter about what's the value. You know,
Right.
where can animations really be leveraged?
Right.
And it seemed the consensus was tracking a mark, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of trying to figure out as you filter
Mm-hmm.
or something changes on your viz where that mark went to,
Right.
animations kind of help your eye track that mark, and this is a good example of that.
Yeah, and I'll also note I've tried to enact animations for a lot of my previous data vises, and if I kind of threw it together and hacked it together to get it to do a certain thing, I usually had to kind of go back and undo some of the hacking and build the chart with more sound fundamentals to make the animations work. It's kind of interesting the way that they've organized it. You know, if you're putting something on the detail shelf when it really should be on the tooltip shelf, you'll have to move that. Sometimes you'll have to aggregate a dimension rather than just put it on the detail shelf. There's a few little things you have to do that run back to how Tableau defines marks as the unique intersections of every dimension that's defining that chart. And if you're not building your charts in alignment with that approach, the animations are you're gonna have to tinker with things to bring them back to better practices to make the animations work.
Excellent. So we have another question here. We'll do one or two more questions here before we wrap it up. But this question's about really being asked to provide everything in a single view, so sort of that one size fits all from executive down to analyst level dashboard. Any advice on how to avoid that, right? How to influence your stakeholders into going a different direction?
I know this pain. I once had a client say, "Hey, if you can have an hour-long call with us, can you fix this dashboard? It's got really long load times." Let me take a look at it. Yeah, it was dozens of filters. And quick filters are query hogs. They're going to slow things down. So if you are asked to add every filter on the sun, you have to be in a situation where you can push back and say, what do you need on a weekly basis? At most, a bi-weekly basis. Because if it's, oh, I just might need to do this once a year, well, that's when you instruct them, well, you can always come back to us and we can give you a custom view or just, quickly navigate that for you. But you don't want to kill everyone's performance just in case you want to use that filter every now and then. Also, if they're saying, okay, so the executives need this perspective, the people further down need that perspective, and you're deep in the process of building the dashboard, sometimes I just, make a copy of the workbook file, rename it, and I'm going to shape one towards the analyst and one towards the executive, only incorporating the relevant filters. I mean, if I can help it, I don't use more than a couple of quick filters if at all possible. And if it's a single selection quick filter, I usually try to make it a parameter instead. Easier now that we've got dynamic parameters. And if it's a filter that's running along the logic of another chart I've got on screen, I try to organize it as an action filter instead. I'm sure Daria's got some insights on this too.
Absolutely. That's what I was just going to say. Her presentation was heavily towards kind of influencing those stakeholders.
Right. Yeah. So I think that what I can add to that is essentially, it's always better, like to have I guess, several, like 2 or 3 dashboards, as opposed to having, as opposed to trying to squeeze everything that other, like, for example, your stakeholder wants to see in one dashboard. So it's kind of like, I guess that the best way is to understand how you can bucket all the information that other people would like to see on Tableau, and like to create specific views that are going to answer like specific questions and will serve a purpose.
Absolutely. Joey,
Yeah,
did
well
you?
put. And sometimes certain questions actually mean, can you build me a different dashboard?
Absolutely.
Yes, Joey, were you going to jump in there? I saw your. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, yeah, I guess what I'm going to do now is just go to Daria's profile and reference the methodology of creating reports in Tableau.
Yep,
Thank
absolutely.
you so much.
The presentation is great.
Thank you.
So I think we're out of questions. So I want to thank you all both. Both your presentations were excellent. If you want to reach Dario or Steve, obviously on Twitter, they're both on Twitter. Their public profiles are on the page here. Any additional questions, feel free to ask in our LinkedIn group or reach out to them personally, either way.
I also put my email into the chat. If you have questions, especially about the class, it's steve@stathunting.com.
Absolutely.
So, hey guys, yeah, if you guys have any questions for Steve and for Daria, and for some reason you can't find this information, put it on our LinkedIn page. Our LinkedIn page, if you haven't joined, please do so. If you have a mobile device, just go to it and request to join. It's the real North Texas Tableau user group. And Steve and Daria, I would highly, if you guys want to join too, that'd be great. So that if individuals did want to reach out to you and they couldn't find your information, they could do it through our group page too.
Yeah. So I have it up on the screen now. Our LinkedIn group is there, and give us a follow.
Joining that LinkedIn group now.
Awesome. So this is where we'll post all of our,
Awesome.
all of our events. We try to share some popular resources there. So yeah, absolutely join if you can. So before we wrap up today, I do want to throw one more thing out there. So on earlier today, I saw some resources online that I do want to mention. I know there's probably people out there hurting pretty badly, either financially or what have you, from the virus outbreak. The app Shift Smart, excuse me, has partnered with the North Texas Food Bank. So if you or a family member or a loved one is in need of work, in need of money, whatever the case may be, download this app. There's some more information at the link provided there. They will make a shift available to you. As you can see on the right, that's the text that comes through. So again, this is a great resource if you have a loved one who might be out of work from the things shutting down, restaurants, bars, what have you. So just want to make that available and put that out there for everyone.
And by the way, if someone is feeling a financial crunch but would still like to take my class, email me, describe your situation. We might be able to work out some kind of payment plan that will work for you. I understand that we're all heading into an uncertain future right now, and you know, I'm passionate about this tool. I'm passionate about teaching it, and if short-term money is the barrier to you learning it and participating in a class, talk to me. Let's try to figure something out. And same goes to anybody you know that you think really needs to learn this tool, needs to boost their marketability as we head into whatever this is going to become.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows when this will be over? So that's an awesome offer, Steve. So with that, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Feel free to join our LinkedIn group, follow us on Twitter, and we hope to see you guys next month.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice night, everyone. Take care.